When it actually comes to drilling the breathe hole itself, this is a very simple operation and it isn't something that I'd go worrying yourself about. Now, drilling a hole in my books in terms of metalwork is only third behind filing and sawing. So drilling is a fairly simple operation. However, as I've already said, if you're not confident in doing this, then I'm sure that you can show this video to a friend or relative who would have the confidence to do it and get the job done for you. Other than drilling the breathe hole, when it comes to fitting the regulator, most of the rest of the work is taking your gun to bits and then having the patience to adjust the pressure of the regulator and the tension of the springs to get the rifle working perfectly. When it comes to marking up for drilling the breathe hole, we've already recommended that you put some masking tape along the cylinder under the barrel after you've degreased it with some light spirit. If you haven't got any masking tape and you think, oh, I can't be arsed, please take note. Some pens that you might think, oh, I've just put some pen marks onto the air reservoir, will have a tendency to affect the bluing or blacking and take it off. Putting some tape onto the cylinder protects that. And then the other reason for putting the tape on is when you come to dot punch onto the cylinder, if you've just got a sharp punch and a shiny metal round surface, it can be quite easy, if you're not bang on, spot on, even when you're quite near the centre and you push down hard, as is demonstrated here, the punch may slip and scratch your cylinder. If you've got the masking tape or another form of tape applied to the cylinder, then once it's on there, you can push quite hard at different angles and the punch won't slip down the side of the metalwork and cause damage. So apart from the masking tape being used to mark up clearly where you're going to drill the hole, it also helps secure the punch in exactly the right place without slipping when you're working. Once you've removed your air reservoir from your rifle, although there's masking tape on the top near the barrel, you still don't want to damage the rest of the surface finish if you can help it. So if you take an old kitchen or cardboard toilet roll tube, you can make yourself the equivalent of a hospital surgical gown and fit it over to protect the rest of the finish while you work upon the air reservoir. When it comes to drilling the breathe hole, we recommend between a 1.5mm drill and a maximum really of a 3.5mm drill. A 1.5mm drill is quite fine, and if you think that's too small for you to use and you don't feel confident, then please use a 2.5mm drill. When it comes to the drills, please also go to the extravagant expense of either buying a new drill or making sure that the drill that you're going to use is in very good condition and is nice and sharp. When you come to mark your reservoir ready for drilling the hole, please remember to make sure that the end of the cylinder is lined up with where it locks up to on the action mounting block. Please don't rush and suddenly think to yourself, oh, we'll mark it up just here, and getting it in the wrong place. Make sure that it lines up exactly how it would do when the rifle was assembled. And also make sure that your markings are plain and easy to see. I've done a few jobs in the past myself, woodworking jobs and other metalworking jobs, where you think you've marked the work, you've gone away for 2 minutes, come back, and the lines that you've put onto the metal itself are that fine you get confused with another couple of scratches and you end up machining or drilling something in the wrong place. So please make sure that all the lines that you put on are crisp, clear and positive. So there we have the two O-rings, the marks where the barrel sits above, and then you're going to put your breathe hole between those two lines along the centre line. Now, for working on your reservoir, if you're an engineer, you've probably got a set of V-blocks anyway and know exactly what you're doing. If you've seen something like this in a friend's garage or shed or a relative's, then probably best if you ask them if you can borrow it, and then you can securely hold your air reservoir within that on your drill press or in your vise whilst you carry out the work. If you've not got one of these or you don't know anyone who has, then it's very simple, and I would advise using some old pieces of wood. Here we've got a piece of ply with a couple of bits of, I think it's coving, wooden coving, simply glued into place, and that's very good for holding your air reservoir secure to stop it rolling about when you're working on it. To get it to be a bit of an extra purchase in there, you could either use some double-sided sellotape or one or two blobs of blue tack or white tack just in the bottom, and then if you press your cylinder down onto that, then that will hold it secure and you can work on it without going to drill or dot punch without it rolling about. When it comes to making the dot punch mark, a dot punch is a very simple tool that you most likely have around in your workshop. You can either have a solid traditional punch, a self-actuating punch where when you press down on it fires and creates the dot punch mark. However, if you don't have a dot punch at home and you can't seem to borrow one, something that you might be able to do to solve the problem is, if you can get a masonry nail off of somebody you know from somewhere. A masonry nail, as it says, is for going into mortar and bricks and things in building, and it's an extremely strong an extremely hard sort of a nail. So if you can get a nice size one of those like this and bring the end to a sharp point, then that should be as equally effective. Now, when you come to putting the mark in itself, it's very important that you hold the dot punch firmly and securely. Now, I've angled this piece of tube round so as you can see it better, but when you've got the dot punch on, you want to be pressing down with your fingers towards the tube as hard as you can. If you don't do this, what can quite often happen is you put the dot punch on and get it in place, and if you're holding it too loose, you can end up with a sort of a bang bang. You don't notice it because it's so quick, but the hammer will jump, and when you go and look at the work, there'll be two punch marks next to each other. So it's very important that you hold the punch and hold it pressed firmly down. Now, when it comes to the size of hammer to use, I've got two very old hammers I've been and found out, just to give an example of the sort of thing that you might have laying around. They're not pristine and brand new, but if you can gauge these to the size of my hand, for dot punching most cylinders with the sort of punch that you're going to be using, that's really about the smallest size hammer, and this is going to be the largest size hammer. I certainly wouldn't recommend a hammer any bigger than that, otherwise you're probably liable to cause more damage than actually just put a dot punch mark in. So for this, I'll choose this small hammer and the masonry nail. So if you lay it on sideways so you can make sure that the tip is on exactly where you want it, and then bring it to the vertical and then give it a nice firm clout. Now, fingers crossed, we should just have a small mark in here. Now, I'll peel this I'll peel this tape off just to show you, but obviously in reality leave the tape on so as it can protect the cylinder whilst you do the clean-up operation and the drilling. Now, dot punch mark you've ended up with shouldn't be too big, but it should be big enough for the tip of the drill to sit in, to keep it in line when you start to drill the hole. When it comes to drilling the hole, having the drill sticking down as far as this isn't a particularly good idea, because it could have a tendency to flex off a little bit if it's not exactly in the right line and you're not holding it very tight. It's best to put it further up inside the chuck and clamp it securely. It's less liable to wobble or veer off when it's set shorter. The smaller the drill, the faster the drill needs to be going. So set your drill to a fairly high speed. Do little pecking motions, don't try and push the drill through all at once, that's a bad idea, so just do little pecks. And once you've broken through onto the inside, if you go up and down a little bit, this will help remove a little bit of extra metal and make the burr inside easier to break off because it'll be more brittle. And it should be no more difficult than that. Now, one little tip is, if you have got a selection of drills at home and you've gone through with say a 1.5mm drill, if you've got a 1.6 or a 1.7mm drill, then it could be useful to then go through this and work this up and down afterwards, and that will remove a little bit more of the burr and so make the job even easier still. I've now put in the slightly bigger drill, set the drill on a slightly faster speed, and once I'm through I shall go up and down and just move the work about just a little bit to try and break off any of the internal burrs that are quite loose. So that's the hole drilling now done. Now your cylinder should hopefully still be covered in its little surgical suit. Leave that on whilst you continue to deburr the inside of the hole and you're working on the cylinder. The best way to remove the burr which will form on the inside of the cylinder, if you've got them, is to use a small circular ball-ended dental burr like dentists use. These should be available on eBay or from your local hardware shop. These are particularly good for removing the little burr on the inside of aluminium airgun reservoirs. So if you've drilled your hole to an appropriate size for the burr, then you should just simply be able to put the burr into a handheld drill or a little high-speed Dremel, put it through to the inside and remove much of the burr in this way. Here hopefully you can see some that I've done earlier. That hole's been cleaned, and so is this one where the burr is left on these two. When it comes to removing the burr from the inside of the cylinder, you really need to use a round section file. Preferably this section should be slightly smaller than the inside diameter curve, so as it'll get right up against the edge of where the burr is. So as to protect any thread in the end of your cylinder, you'll best wrap the file in masking tape and then put some marks on where the hole is, so that when you've got the file inside you can work in just that particular area. Don't press on too hard because of scratching the inside of the cylinder, but just enough to knock the main burrs and get them off. Finally, once you've used the files, to carefully remove as much of the burr as you possibly can. To give it a final clean up, you best use a piece of plastic, wooden or aluminium rod or tube. Stick some appropriate wet and dry paper to the end of this rod and wrap it round. You should put a mark on where the end of the cylinder is in comparison to the breathe hole, so as you're not sanding down here way past it, so you know where that is. And then to create a little bit of side pressure inside the tube, if you wrap a little piece of paper tissue or soft sponge in with the wet and dry, then once you've got this into the cylinder you can use that to remove the rest of the bearing, just by making sure you press and work it in that particular spot. For more on polishing the inside of your cylinder up, this is for steel cylinders, the polishing up, not for aluminium. Please go and watch the video on cleaning the inside of your reservoir ready for installation of a regulator, and that talks more about the grades of wet and dry you should be using and how just to clean out any scratches that might be in the cylinder apart from where you've drilled the breathe hole. So once you've got off most of the burrs and you've cleaned the breathe hole, you're about done and dusted. And then finally, once you're happy with the inside of the air reservoir and the rest of the gun's ready to go back together, take off the cardboard surgical jacket and peel off the masking tape. There'll probably be a little burr on the outside of the hole, and if you use a small sharp countersink, make sure it is a good sharp one, either in a slow running battery operated drill or just with your fingers. Place it into the top of the hole, press and go round, and then that should just remove any little burr that's remaining on there, and that's your cylinder all ready to go back onto your rifle. Now, for you doom and gloom merchants who are saying I haven't got a small drill press, etc., think laterally. Here's what I'm going to do very quickly in the simplest possible way: is piece of steel tubing, blue tack, fasten it securely and tightly into a 3-point corner so that it's secured that way, that way and that way, and that's nice and tight, so hopefully that's not going anywhere. And here you have it. You should be able to lean one arm, wrist and drill against the wall. You can use the floor as a support as well to hold it in the right place. There's a hole that we drilled earlier, so let's do a second one. So there you have it, 2 holes simply drilled into a piece of steel tubing using the most basic of tools. So you should be quite able to drill a quite accurate breathe hole in your reservoir no matter what level of equipment and skill that you've got.